Thank you. It was a delight to be here at the first event in November. It's even more so to be back again. Please do answer the question that is on the Slido over there. This session is framed around that question, so it'd be helpful to get your response. I'm Vice President for Advisory Services at OPTUM, which I wasn't when I was last here. For those of you who don't know, OPTUM is a big healthcare delivery company in the US, part of United Health Group, employing somewhere in the region of 160,000 doctors and nurses delivering healthcare. Particularly, OPTUM runs integrated primary care systems, so large groups of general practices running healthcare systems and taking risk on behalf of populations. So it was very much at the forefront of accountable care system in the US, trying to move the risk of care from the payer to provide a system to take accountability. You may have noticed, therefore, my slight reticence to answer questions about NHS England and their commissioning responsibilities when I now work for an American healthcare company, which I'm sure many of you will have a view on. I end up here because I have a long history of working in NHS as a finance director and chief executive in different parts of the NHS. And through that, and being an independent consultant previously, I've ended up working with Jeremy Hobart and his team in Plymouth and in the Southwest around how do you make changes and stay positive when you have suddenly become a lone consultant in a service that is so successful that you're overrun with patients on a daily basis. And it's been an absolute privilege to work with them over the last few years and some great initiatives that they've been working on, trying to set up a different structure for how they deliver and now thinking about how to create a regional network across services in the Southwest. So I don't end up here speaking from an OPTUM perspective, I end up here from that perspective. So this is the question that we are going to start with, and the fundamental piece about how do you get change to happen. Do you think you have the power to get change to happen? One of the really interesting things in OPTUM is we have a subsidiary in OPTUM called the Advisory Board, who are leading company in international research of best practice and evidence. And what you can tell by using data, which OPTUM is renowned for, the use of data to improve healthcare, the Advisory Board can look at, across its membership, which is international from many, many countries around the world, it can work out who is more likely to be activated by other people's research and evidence, who downloads stuff off the website, who interacts with things on social media platforms. Where is it that people generally just get on and do things once you can prove that this is the best way to do it because we've researched something across lots of international systems. And there is a clear place in the world where people just get on and do because they see research and evidence posted on a website and they feel activated for change. And it may come as a surprise to you, but that place is Australia. And the place that comes last at the bottom of the league for being activated by international best practice and evidence and what other people do is the UK by some distance. We are, without doubt, one of the systems that struggles more to look at international best practice and evidence and make it real and get activated to change things, which, if we're going to work for a company who believes in data and evidence, is a bit of a problem. So, I now run a team in OPTUM. I got this email from a member of my team who said, the problem is this resourcing question is a catch-22. And I said, what do you mean it's a catch-22? And he said, well, we're not going to get more resources in this team unless we can provide the data on productivity of our current team and provide that to the finance director of the organization. But we can't produce the data and evidence we need for the finance director because we don't have the person in the team who would be able to produce the evidence and the data in order to show the productivity of the current team. And she said, and that is a catch-22. And it was one of the moments when she realized that staring across the table at someone who spends a lot of time doing executive and personal coaching for thousands of hours in my life was not going to be the most helpful time to call something a catch-22. Catch-22, for you who don't know, there's a new mini-series on the telly right now. George Clooney makes a very small role as, he becomes General Scheisskopf, and is a story of Yossarian, who's a bombardier in the US Army towards the end of the Second World War in a little place of Italy, and he's trying to get out of the Air Force, not the Army, by flying his missions, and the missions, Colonel Cathcart keeps increasing the number of missions you have to fly, so he can see no end to the chances that he's going to get blown up as he goes off to bomb different parts of Italy. And the catch-22 is that you don't have to go flying if you're crazy. But if you say you're crazy, you're not crazy. And so I don't have to fly if I am crazy, but if I tell you I'm crazy, I'm clearly not crazy because I've worked out that I've told you I'm crazy, therefore I don't have to fly. And you end up in the classic and original definition of what is a catch-22. And so why is that relevant, A, to this presentation, or B, to the fact that somebody in my team wanted some more resources in order that we could break into the basic problem? The issue is this: if you call something a catch-22, you don't have to bother trying to solve the issue, because you have in your head said, this is a non-solvable problem. And I've given myself permission for not having to start to solve the problem because I've called it a catch-22. So if we just exchange language and call something a catch-22, we can all agree that you are caught in a catch-22 and it is impossible to solve the issue. And therein lies the question that is on slide, and I'm delighted that you have a positive response to it, because the question is, do you believe that you can change something? The other thing is that wishing something was different is of no use to anybody. This is my favorite coachee that I've had over the last 15 years, which is helpful. It is my wife. You may have got to that point slightly ahead of me. That slightly disapproving look that you may detect on her face at whoever took this photograph is nothing compared to the disapproving look I would get if she knew her face was on the presentation in front of all of you. But I'm sure that will be fine. I have lived with Paula for over 30 years, and I know I don't look old enough, and certainly nor does she. She's always wanted to play sport for her country, and she again made the unfortunate. She's quite good at sport, not at that level, but she's quite good at sport, and much better than me. Anyway, I got bored of this continual wishing of something that was never going to happen, and I eventually said, do you want some coaching on this thing you keep wishing about? Because frankly, for the rest of us, this continued inability to watch the Olympics because you wish you were there is not particularly helpful. Oh, she said, that would be great, believing I had nothing to offer in the world of executive coaching. And I think, what are we now? 11 years ago, we had a few coaching sessions about dealing with this crazy wish she had. And we went through a structured decision-making process about how would you, if you wanted to do this, how would you get on and play for your country, England, Great Britain, Europe, take any level of geographical representation. So do you go for a tiddlywinks or something that has got fewer people playing it? Do you go for the thing you're best at? How would you go around this? And she is best at playing hockey, and she decided that hockey was the best route, and she did get off her backside and found out how you got to play for representative sides at England Masters, and phoned up and went to a trial and got through the trial and got through to the final trial to play for England over 40s, as she had just turned 40. And she didn't get in, which is a great end to the story, right? She didn't get in. And one of the things that we will talk about as we go through this is you can, and I genuinely know not a lot about MS, and I'm happy to compete with who knows the least about MS in this room, and I will have a good stab at winning that. What I do know is Having a sense of turning what you wish to be true into some action will eventually take you closer to the place you want to get to. So you may not get to that very end point of what you think is the definition of total success, but you're certainly going to end up a lot closer to it if you get busy and active than if we just believe it's not possible and it's a catch-22 and it's impossible. And so the call to action here is about believing it's possible. It is about becoming active. And it is about recognizing that trying to get there will get you as close to the goal as it is possible to get. The other bit, and the kind of theme of the rest of the presentation is, and what do you marshal against? What are you marching for? Because the danger is that we start chasing a whole load of targets without really understanding and truly agreeing in this room amongst this wonderful cohort leadership of MS services in the UK, without agreeing truly what you're going after, because it certainly isn't a set of targets. And there's a model that we use a lot. I've used a lot in coaching. I've used with the team in Plymouth, and we use in national programs now with the NHS, which many of you may have seen it being the most watched TED Talk on the internet. Just hands up, anyone who has seen Simon Sinek do Start With Why, because you're going to get a bad version. I just want to know how many people have never seen him do his masterful version. Great. So it is definitely worth investing 15 minutes of your time to look at Simon Sinek's Start With Why presentation on the internet. He has a book called Start With Why. If you watch the internet, you can make a choice about whether you think it's going to be worth buying the book or not. What Sinek talks to, and although this is going to start with private sector retail, I promise you this is really relevant to how the NHS works and how services work. What he says is, people get busy in the what of life. Companies know what they sell you. Costa knows it sells you coffee, and it sells you cakes, and it sells you paninis, and they know what they sell you. And a lot of companies have worked out that they need a differentiating brand proposition, a unique selling point, and so they know how they're going to attempt to take your money better than other companies can do it. And that's the how. How do I convince you that you want Costa coffee more than you want Starbucks coffee? How do we make that happen? But what Sinek says is the very best companies are the ones that start profoundly from purpose, from understanding why they do what they do. And his most famous example, and hopefully by the time I get to the end of this example, you will know who it is before we get there. His most famous example is, starting with why, in everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo, we believe in thinking differently. We do it by making our products beautifully designed, easy to use, and user-friendly. We happen to make computers. Do you want to buy one? Now, whether you have yet caught up, I will go through that again, and you'll definitely get it the second time, because everything we do is about challenging the status quo and about thinking differently. We make our products beautifully designed, easy to use, and user-friendly. We happen to make watches. Do you want to buy one? Now, Apple don't market to you directly as challenging the status quo and thinking differently. They do market directly to you on beautifully designed, easy to use, and user-friendly. But the innate prospect that your brain can now I've said it out loud, can start to process is, there is an unwritten thing in that company about challenging the status quo and thinking differently. And I know it works on me. If you want to see how much Apple kit is in my house, I can show you plenty of it. The point of it is, my brain can do a process which is remarkable. Everything we do is about challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. We make our products beautifully designed, easy to use, and user-friendly. We're going to open a GP practice. Do you want to join? And your brain can start to process the fact that it will be overpriced, you'll be locked in for life, and all the other connotations on the downside of Apple. But for great sections of the society, wow, that would be innovative, wouldn't it? That would be exciting, wouldn't it? That would be, in a way that I can't quite understand, that would be amazing. It's probably not going to be that great a GP practice in the way that the watch isn't a great watch and the phone's not a great phone, but it would change my life. it would challenge the status quo. They are the kind of company that will take a headphone socket off a phone because they'll challenge the status quo and they'll think differently. And it annoys me distinctly, but it doesn't stop me because I've bought into that kind of ethos of the company. And there are others, right? So Amazon is make business easy. Their central tenet is not about how they do what they do. Their central point was, and still is, if you make business easy, you can put anything in this what circle. They can sell you absolutely, literally anything in that column. In a way that Dell made a watch, right? Dell made a watch and nobody bought it. Of course nobody bought a watch from Dell. Dell make, as we know, differentiating proposition. They make mid-range computing technology that I'm quite happy to buy because it does a job for the money. But you wouldn't buy a watch from them, would you? Because they don't sell from Y in the same way. For those of you who are old enough, like me, to remember that the internet used to make sounds when you plugged it in and dialed it up, Amazon got into one-click technology as their driving how. Their key differentiating factor was, we can do everything in one click. And one click mattered because a click was a lot of beeps and sounds on a telephone line, which probably was going to get interrupted by something else happening. So that's the private sector example. And when we do this work in the public sector, it's equally as important. It's equally important to how you communicate with people. So I've done some work with a education department in Plymouth. Now, education departments in local authorities have no future because multi-academy trusts are the future of education, and multi-academy trusts working collaboratively together will drive up the quality of education. So if you're doing this work with an education department, it's fairly straightforward. You just say, you have no purpose, and we finish at that point. Of course, the education department, we're trying to work on the fact that in Plymouth particularly, it's the 14th largest city in the country, and it massively underperforms economically. And the key to economic performance going forward is investing in your children and making sure you have a workforce that people want to invest in. It is critically important to the whole economic future of the southwest of England and to Plymouth as a city that you improve the educational attainment for children. And yet, you've just been told that the whole of future of educational attainment is going to be done by multi-academy trusts. So we did a lot of work on what is your purpose, which was difficult and painful. And they ended up with what sounds like, as many of these things do, like a painfully simple answer. Everything we do is about working in partnership to improve chances for kids in this city, which we could have written, any decent consultant could have written within 5 minutes of walking through the door. The key to it is that the word partnership to them, the only really important piece in that sentence, profoundly shifted what they did every single day from then on. They went out to actively answer every single problem they faced through working in partnership. They created Catered, which is a school meal service that's owned 51% by the local authority and 49% by all the local schools. Because the schools couldn't run that company on their own, they needed a risk-bearing entity. The local authority found its role in partnership, and through the ownership of schools and the incentivization of schools to take up free meals because they would all be incentivized in the company structure, school meals go up. It's all produced from local produce, and the whole of the ethos of the company is created. And it's created because they understood purpose. Everything we do is about working in partnership. The leadership team changed the way in which it went out into the world. So start with why is important, and the kind of and the piece it gets to in a wide group of people like this is if we just set out the what, you just start chasing targets that start to annoy you. You start doing tasks that start to irritate you because you lose the sense of the purpose with which you come together. And so my kind of half challenge, but also encouragement for this 2 days is to think really carefully about what is your purpose as you work together collectively, which to a large degree I think you probably know already. But one of the important things, you'll have that slide. One of the important things is purpose is not your vision, values, or mission. All of those things can stay intact. So you need vision, right, to improve MS services for all people with MS and their families, and to make delivering these services for all involved a rich and rewarding experience. There is nothing I'm going to say that's going to detract from the importance of having a vision which you all align. In fact, it's critical, as are the values that we hold true or the behaviors that we think are important. But it's what is the statement of direction around which you can all orientate so you know what you're doing over the next year, and we can keep coming back to it, because it is more like a compass direction than a detailed roadmap. If I tell you to do this, and then this, and then this, if something goes wrong, you don't know what to do next. If I say we're trying to get over there, generally going southwest, generally going 10 miles southwest, we're not all going to end up in exactly the same place, but we're all going to be close. And the point is that I'll know what to do when I come to the first roadblock or the first problem, because we've aligned at a level that gives us a compass direction. Do you want to start putting questions up? I'm happy to. Good. Thank you. I was, as a chief executive, I used to stand on platforms and say I'm really happy to interact with the audience. And I remember once in North Yorkshire doing a presentation about community hospitals in North Yorkshire, which, as you can imagine, is a really fun thing to do as a chief executive, ex-finance director in North Yorkshire. And at that very point when I said, I'm really happy for people to interact, I got my first shout of vitriol from the back, and that was it for the rest of the meeting. It was just one shout after the other as we tried to manage. So this is much better that we are choosing a nice way to interact.
Can we just make sure that everybody is linked into the room that's from ideas to action with your phone? So each room or each section has its own little area that you can go and questions for. It might be in a different room.
Let's all be in the room. So, for example, we all know that the general purpose that we all come to work for is something to do with the triple or quadruple aim. The idea that we are trying to improve the output from our system for all the people who work in it and are served by it from the resources that we have available. That is a general statement that would apply here or would apply to any service in the NHS. And when we do this kind of work in a workshop, it is almost universally the first answer when you say, let's start to work on what our purpose is, that people say, well, clearly our purpose is a triple aim purpose, which is, of course, right. The point is, it's like, of course, the answer, it's the meaning of life, isn't it, is always going to be the answer to what's your purpose, individually or collectively. What we're looking for is something that differentiates what we're going after and doesn't just allow us all to say the thing that we all know every day. We're trying to improve quality of services for everybody who works in it for the quality of outcome. What happens when your vision clashes with the vision of your NHS trust? Yeah. So remember, this doesn't seek to be a vision that challenges other people. Just get that back up. Thank you. This, the question, what happens when your vision clashes with the vision of your NHS trust? The point that we are looking for in all of this kind of work is something that is true for the team or group of people that you want to, that we're talking about, but doesn't clash fundamentally with the organization. So I work for OPTUM in the UK. We are a very small organization in comparison to the 150,000 doctors and nurses we employ. There is, of course, not just an OPTUM vision and mission in the US, but it's also part of United Health Group, who also have their vision and mission in the US. And the job, of course, in the UK is not to say, A, we don't need to have a purpose statement, nor to say our purpose statement is exactly the same as the one that works in California. The job is to say, what is our purpose here, which has to align overall with what we're trying to achieve as a business and entity, but define what we're doing locally. There is no, Simon Sinek does not give a silver bullet to answer all the questions of woe that we all struggle with, or the fact that we have restrictions, but to what degree do you use the fact there are restrictions and there are difficulties and you have no money and it's really tough and organizations won't let you do things to stop you being the very best that you can be? And that's the real question here as a team. Do you understand what your purpose is, and do you use it to drive to be the very best that you can be? How do we make our why or our purpose, both personal and collective at the same time? Is it, I'm blooming wish I brought my glasses. Is it at a team level or department? I have a personal purpose statement. You would expect someone who's been doing this for 5 or 6 years to have, at some point on train journeys and car journeys, ruminated on what is my personal purpose. My job is to make sure that where I work aligns with what I think is my global purpose. And we have a purpose in the project that I work in, we have a purpose in the department that I manage, we have a purpose in the organization I work for, and to some degree those things share some DNA, and to some degree they are unique. I'm working in one project at the moment where we have a purpose statement that says be one step ahead of the customer for all sorts of reasons that I won't bore you with, but it really makes sense to the team that are delivering in that project. We just need to be better at being one step ahead of the customer. And in the same way that does not define everything that we are trying to achieve, nor does Apple's statement. They don't just challenge the status quo and think differently, right? They do try and make money. They do try and take as much out of my pocket as they possibly can on a regular basis, on a monthly, frequent, annual basis. They are driving at profit. They only exist for one reason, and that's to increase the share price of that organization. But their purpose statement says, we will get there. We will get to that point by not focusing on the money, but by focusing on innovation and by focusing on challenging the status quo and thinking differently. What would be an example of a purpose at the NHS? So I'll come back to the MS services bit. We do a lot of work with, you'll enjoy this, those of you who are not from CCGs in the room. We do a lot of work with CCGs. We've worked with about 60-odd CCGs through an NHS England programme, all of whom have been through this Start With Why. And it's a really interesting time to ask CCGs, what is your current purpose? What do you think your purpose, what do you think you're on this planet to do? What do you think you're driving at every day that you come to work? And of course, they will start with, we are the ones that are the custodians on behalf of the population of improving the quality of services, hitting the triple aim from within the money available. They are really clear of their guardianship of that population position. And what we end up with when you go through this process is, and so do all of you, and so do all of us. So what's the CCG's unique contribution? And the closest you get to answering that question successfully is, in the future, our job needs to focus everything we need to do on enabling the system to work effectively. Which sounds really easy when you get to it. These are people who think they may have no job in the future. It's quite a painful process to go through, but it says it's not about contracts, it's not about quality meetings, it's not about all the things that we do, it's just making sure that everything we do, we can look each other in the eye and say we're trying to make the system work better for everyone. Enable the system to work effectively. What was your purpose as a chief executive? It's time to move on with the present. What was your purpose as chief executive? So my personal purpose, and has been for some time, and different versions of this format, is to enable the environment in which other people are successful. And the reason I joined an American healthcare company isn't because I've given up believing in the NHS, it's how do I think I most enable environments in which other things are successful. And we have a particular place in that. My job as a chief executive, I ran a PCT that had 1,850 staff running community mental health services in York. And I never lost the sense that I know very, very little as a 34-year-old chief executive. I know much less than most of the incredibly impressive clinicians in the system, but what I did know was how to manage the system to enable it to work effectively or less effectively, depending on your point of view. And the sense that everybody, chief executives or anybody, can have a view on their sense of purpose is important. Let me come back to the presentation. I will get to more questions. Purpose is not vision, mission. It's not about values. It is what is the statement that drives you into direction. And it can, therefore, be something that is pertinent only to the short term and not to the long term. It doesn't have to be an all-encompassing forever statement. I worked in a system where everything we do is about creating a vehicle for integration. That is not a purpose statement. It's not a high-level statement of any description. But for that 18-month period, I wanted everybody to focus on creating a vehicle for integration of health and care services. If we got the vehicle, then we could exploit it. But let's really get focused on everything we do. And so purpose statements give you direction. And in the absence of thinking about what your purpose statement is in any great detail, one thing that did strike me that follows from your answer to slide earlier, everything we do is about, and we can follow through on different versions of that. But the core, I think, of why you come together here is not because somebody's about to give you lots more money, not because somebody's about to give you all of the tools that make everything easier, give you the second consultant or the first or second specialist nurse or MS coordinator or whatever else it is that you need, or indeed your drug budget or whatever else needs to happen to make the thing successful. But you come together because everything you do is about making sure you're doing everything you can to deliver the changes you want to see. It is about you. And the reason that question comes up right up at the front, this is not an answer, by the way. This is a discussion point in the middle of a presentation. I'm not for one moment suggesting that this is your purpose. But if you take that, you believe, a lot of you believe, agree or strongly agree that you've got the power in this room, then the binding purpose is at least one element of it. It's about being able to look each other in the eye and saying, are we doing everything we can then in this room to create the kind of universe we want to create? Would I be able to do it much faster if you gave me the extra 170 million, 250 million, whatever the number you calculate to be the answer, or the infrastructure to deliver faster care, or more specialists, or started training, or whatever the other things are? Of course you could. But the core of it is, and the core of this presentation and my general thinking about change and action is get busy on doing something. Otherwise, you'll sit and wish you were playing for England for the whole of your life and do nothing about it. Because all of these things are in your gift, right? So you can do much more, and you will talk about audit. You can do much more to know where you are, to count things and get the best data. You could be an area that decides to have better data than other areas about what you're doing consistently across the country. Other people may have received national funding to do it. Other people may have lots of fancy tech to do it. But you can make an absolute commitment as a group to get to know the best about where you are and to agree a level of ambition and work towards a common goal. That is what you are here to do, to talk to paper that Gavin and others have produced on what is our ambition, where we're trying to get to. You can choose from this moment on to work better together. Interesting commentary on how different specialists work together in different areas that I would agree with, that you have a choice to collaborate and help each other when things get hard. That is entirely within your gift. To agree on best practice and standard pathways based on evidence. And I know there are very difficult processes that you have to go through, and if you want to do that, and there are lots of other mechanisms, but at a fundamental level, you could work harder to agree more of what best practice looks like if you wanted to. And let's not call out all the failures along the way. Let's not call out all the difficulties along the way. Let's recognize that trying is going to get us as close to the end point as possible, and that we value every inch of progress we make that is entirely down to your hard work and effort and energy, because at the moment, nobody is giving you the X pounds that you need. If you remember the presentation I gave in November, it was also saying make sure you have a campaign that sets out exactly how much money you could save, how many years of brain health you could save for investment in your service. That still absolutely is true. I'm not trying to speak against what I said before. I passionately believe if you collectively agree to this kind of stuff and then added on top of it a real understanding of what a pound of investment would return in terms of the population of this country, you are a small enough specialty that somewhere along the line, somebody's going to be interested in the return they will get for the numbers you are talking about. But without all of that money and all of the opportunity, this is still all in your gift. So believe it is possible. Understand why we are doing what we do, and I can come back to Synex, start with why. I've got a much more interesting story about Liverpool Football Club and start with why if you want to ask that question right now. I'm more than happy to wax lyrical about a tiny piece of work I did with Liverpool, which I will gladly spend 20 minutes on. Become active and recognize that trying will get us as close to the goal as possible, which is almost the end of the presentation. But 10 years after that, not 10 years after this photo, actually, I couldn't find a photo from 11 years ago, if I'm honest. 10 years after this photo was taken, and my wife has kept playing hockey all the way through her 40s, despite lots of opportunity to give up, like moving from Yorkshire to Devon, and lots of other opportunities for us to not focus every Saturday throughout the whole of the winter on hockey activity. She kept playing because, guess what? Trying and not getting there was an incredible motivator to carry on doing the thing that she realized she loved doing, which was playing sport to the highest level she could. So 10 years later, she recontacts what then is going to be the over 50s Masters hockey. You're ahead of me. I know you're ahead of me. It's all right. Goes back to the trials, and she gets through the first round of trials, gets a great letter inviting her to the final round of trials, and goes to the final round of trials, and this time thinks she's played really, really well. And which is just fantastic. Came back really buzzing and didn't get in. Which, it's a long story of coaching somebody over an 11-year period to deal with this amount of dreaming and believing. But the resilience, and as I say, kept her playing hockey for 10 years to the highest standard she could, kept her fit and active for as long as she could. And of course, this whole presentation wouldn't be complete without the very final slide, would it? Which is she went back this year and finally after all of that, represented England at the Home Nations about 3 weeks ago. And it is her story, right? But it's a story that is based in, she is, how do you say stubborn in a nice way? She is an incredibly determined person who had really taken responsibility for this dream that she had, and wishing is cheap. As I kept telling her, wishing is cheap. It requires no activation. But you can, if you are resilient enough, if you understand what you're trying to achieve, and you have this sense of purpose about what you're trying to do, you can achieve remarkable, remarkable things. Thank you. I will come to questions. Is there any questions from the floor, as well as me reading, as you all watch me do something at a distance for 49? I'm 2 years younger, as you can tell. That 49-year-old people don't do as well as youngsters and try and read from a distance. Are there any questions from the floor? And I can't see anything. There's a light shining in my eyes. So let me start over there then. What happens when you involve all those with a stake in the issue in determining the purpose? Well, that is probably the most interesting part of the whole model. You don't have to start doing purpose with small groups of people of leadership. You can, of course, create leadership purpose. But you can easily, across this group, think about what it is that drives you, which is not just about the vision, which is not just saying very best MS services, but if you believe that time is the real key here, then you would drive at everything we do is something about time. And if you believe that data is the real issue here, then everything we do relies on us having the very best data first. And that would take you in a different direction about what is the thing you are going to obsess about, what is the thing you're going to get up every morning and focus on. Can the work stream of the conference be rephased as purpose, e.g. audit, surface what we do and its impact? Can the work streams of the conference... So, without trying to sound like I am but a hammer and everything is a nail, I would definitely agree that that framing and understanding in each of the work streams what is the core part of what that work stream is trying to do would be important. And I see purpose in everything, right? I see the answer as make sure you align around something greater than the task list. If you work in the NHS for any amount of time, you soon get to realize that its greatest currency is an unbelievable ability to deal in what. I can tell you that you are successful when you send me an action plan with some actions on it that will show me that you are successful. It is an absolute trade in action plans and program plans and delivery. And I worked in a recovery process, in a turnaround process in one NHS organisation where the percentage that you could put down to the success of each of the programs of work was correlated to the state of the program plan. If it had a plan, that would be 10%. If you had a program owner, that would be another 10%. If you had actions, that would be another 10%. If you had et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a great industry of creating meaningless plans that had all of those things in order that you could generate a successful set of actions. The point of purpose is, in an organization that is used to trading in the what and the action plan and the actions, to give you a chance to get some higher level to the way in which you work together. Anybody want to ask a physical question and have a physical interaction? I realize now that I'm entirely on my own here. I have no second double act to help share the load, and I feel like I'm speaking into an echo chamber, and I'm just making sure that everybody is on the same page on purpose, or I've lost you all at some point.
So what about having people with a disease give us our purpose? They define the purpose. Is that in terms of the partnership with them? Because we think we know what we want to do, but maybe they're the best people to find that. So
100%, what is the purpose of people living with the condition that you are treating? What is their purpose aspiration? Talking to any set of users about what really matters to them in another language, but purpose of how we align what we're doing with the people that we are here to serve and to treat is critical. And in any sense of should we just sit in a room together, even with all your brilliance, people sat in this room and define a purpose that is not aligned or not thinking about those that we serve would absolutely be the wrong way to go.
I mean, so Helen and I are doing this one on the social determinants of health. And so our purpose could be that no patient is left behind. We want to make sure we provide a service for everybody who's vulnerable. But they may come back and say, well, the reason why I can't engage is I just can't afford the transport, or the issues are economic or more complicated, which potentially we as a group have very little control over. But I don't think we should ignore those things. But how would we set the purpose of that work stream? The social determinants of health that are way beyond our control.
Do you want to add to that?
Just simply you add transport in for free as part of the service.
So I profoundly agree. And so I would be thinking really carefully about the fact that you are working in an area that is dealing with the 90% of the impact on anybody's health and care, which is not within the gift of healthcare. So you are moving from the 10% which you currently focus on to the 90%, which is all of the social determinants of health, including wealth and education and all the other housing and all the other things that go with it, for which you won't solve every problem, some of which are solvable in transport. So thinking carefully about, so what does that mean the purpose of this work stream is, because it has such a wide possibility of solving the whole of the wider determinants of health, which cover the 90% of impact on people's lives, is important. In fact, it's probably more important in that than in some areas where it is clearer that the task we are going at, like data, is more easy to define. So what is it? What is your key purpose in going after social determinants of health? Because you've got an awful lot to go at, and you run the risk of creating the meaning of life and the impossibility of life if you don't find a route to say, everything we're going to do in this work stream is about ... Any other questions, or shall I go back to the screen? I can't read against the orange background. Often increased demand for a service is viewed as a disadvantage. How do we counteract this view, which is common in the NHS? There is a piece that we talk about in population health management. So OPTUM are running population health management programs across the NHS for NHS England in some of the most advanced integrated care systems. I showed you some population health management stuff last time, which is the idea that we can collect all the data about a person from all of the agencies that work in primary care, community, screening, acute, ambulance, mental health, social care, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you could see all the data, you could make a profound change. That every time I start answering a question, it comes off, and I keep thinking, I cannot remember where I started this answer, just to go back to look up there very carefully, unknown to the audience, and, oh yes, increased demand, that's right. And if you look at population health management, if you can see the totality of the interactions that somebody has with the health system, you soon realize that trying to keep people from the health service is a really bad plan. What you end up with is people chaotically seeing their GP 63 times in a year and seeing community services 41 times in a year and still ending up with 4 acute admissions to hospital. So it's not that we managed through chaos to deal with really good care. Why didn't the GP practice actively invite that patient and that cohort of patients, the other 10 patients who are similar, to come in every week on a planned basis and look after their care and actively case manage that individual rather than dealing with them chaotically? And the answer is exactly to the point of we have spent a generation or more with overworked primary care and overworked health services in general that have just got to, if we don't have to see the patient right now today in this setting, we will push them somewhere else because we are completely overworked. And tell us about Liverpool, thank you. I'm not going to answer the Liverpool question, you'll have to catch me later. But in general, so how do you, as a service, actively engage with people, bring them in, not necessarily face-to-face, in a way that suits them, in a way that is discussed with them, but stop looking at demand as something that is flowing over the top of the dam to hit us and start to take control of the fact, I know how often we see this patient. We are making a choice about how we now divide up the one consultant that we have left in this service who's still standing and how we use their time. It's a profoundly different way of thinking about demand. I don't think it's directly to purpose, but it's definitely directly to the kind of work you do from population health management. So how did you resolve not having the time to produce the data to prove that you didn't? Great point. So, you know, catch-22, if you are crazy, you don't have to fly. And if you don't want to fly, you are definitely not crazy because you realize you don't have to fly. The minute you define that as a catch-22, you stop solving the problem. There is, of course, a solution to the very definition of catch-22 in that book, right? And I could start solving for it now. I've thought about this before. So somebody else could say that you were crazy. Somebody else could say that you were crazy. So the point of the conversation with my colleague who works with me was we will start solving the problem. How do we start solving the problem? How do we eat away at the fact that you've defined it as a catch-22? The first thing to do was to call it out and say it's not a catch-22, it's a difficult problem. But we could start finding solutions. And so the very point of that catch-22 piece up front is to say, don't call it a catch-22 because you don't start to solve it. I can give you a solution to the thing that's in the novel, and I can give you a solution to how we get resources, and that is, let's do some work to produce some data that will start to build towards this thing, and let's convince that this person isn't just going to stick rigidly to the thing that you say they're going to stick rigidly to, that they might actually have a human perspective to them, even though they've got finance in their title, and I might be able to have a realistic conversation about what would I need to do in order that you would be convinced about the service. Is that a solution? No, but the minute you start looking for solutions, you might try and find them. You might actually find them, rather than it's a catch-22, which was why I called them out on it to say, don't call it that, because you've stopped looking for the solution. We're just going to blame them forevermore for the fact that they've created this impossibility of either we're crazy or we're not crazy, and if we are, we can't, and if we aren't, we're not. Any other questions? Did that make any sense? I look out at this audience and I hope that was enjoyable. I hope that was useful. Thank you for the interaction, and more than happy to tell you about Liverpool at any point for the rest of the day. It'd be great. Thank you very much.